Larry Scott, man, the gift that just keeps on giving. One of the worst commissioners in recent memory out there. Another situation here where everybody else is having to foot the bill for his mistake. What is up, everybody? It is Jake with Master of Football back at it again. Happy Wednesday. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to be up to date on everything college football, pro football, Madden, EA college football, NFL draft, anything related to American football, hit that red subscribe button. You'll not be disappointed. Also the like button too. Again, as of right now, I'm filming this the night before. It's 998 subs. They're this close to 1,000, baby. Anyways, I appreciate all my fans and everything like that. Like I said, we're going to be getting some things going here. We got a lot of cool things coming up for us in the pipeline for all you Master Football fans out there. Without further ado, let's get into the video. Oh my gosh, there was a tweet that came out recently in connection with a couple other articles out there right now that are drawing a lot of issues for the Pac-12. I'm telling you right now, this is one of the top stories in college football here because, again, basically the Pac-12 is the second that the Big Ten wants to end the Pac-12, they are able to. However, it looks like that might happen internally is what's going to happen here. So we're going to go over a couple of things really quickly here because there's potentially some situations with the Pac-12. We're going to go over four things really quickly here. First, we're going to go over Washington State and their financial pain they're going through right now. Next, we're going to go through ESPN and their contract negotiations in connection to Washington State. Also, we're going to talk about a couple of limitations Washington State is facing right now going forward, especially when you head into the new world of conference realignment. And then last but not least, we're going to go over what I think is going on. Let's get into that tweet really quickly here from Brett McMurphy. And again, this tweet came out the other day. Here we are. It says, Washington State President Kirk Schultz says WSU Athletics will have, and I quote, temporary freeze on all current and future vacant positions until further review, as well as a pause on non-essential travel purchases and new professional development because of significant decrease in Pac-12 revenue distribution as a result of overpayments from one of the conference media partners that must be resolved. Relocation of the Pac-12 headquarters out of San Francisco exceeded budget projections as well. Additionally, Washington State projects that the Cougar Athletics exceeded its expenditures for the year due to inadequate documentation of revenue and expenditures. So this situation is absolutely positively not good for Washington State. One, because again, it's a situation we talk about it mentioned that the overpayments from the conference media partners that must be resolved. Remember here, this connects back to Larry Scott, the gift that keeps on giving to the Pac-12. Larry Scott, some negotiations here and there, definitely he flubbed some numbers out there. Again, I had a video on Monday about some of the issues that Kevin Warren wasn't able to resolve with the Big Ten's deal. Now remember here, the Big Ten potentially loses on 1% of $7 billion. $70 million is a lot, but remember that he still have 99% of that deal. Larry Scott, man, the gift that just keeps on giving. One of the worst commissioners in recent memory out there. Another situation here where everybody else is having to foot the bill for his mistake. And then we come over here to front office sports because, and again, this is what reported a couple of days ago, but I wanted to make sure this connects to this. ESPN unlikely to renew the Pac-12 media rights deal. It says that ESPN and Fox's current Pac-12 broadcast deal expires July 1 of 2024, just before that was the day, that's the day that USC and UCLA will be leaving for the Big Ten. Going forward, man, it just doesn't necessarily look very good for them. It says more schools could repeatedly leave the Pac-12 if it doesn't secure annual media rights around $300 million by Andrew Cohen of Front Office Sports. It says here ESPN and the Pac-12 are having no substantive talks at this time, and the network seems very unlikely to strike a new media rights deal with the conference, reports Andrew Marchand of the New York Post. It highlights here specifically the Pac-12's current 12-year deal with deals with Fox and ESPN expire July 1, 2024, and carry an average combined value of $250 million. Fellow Power 5 conferences, the Big 12, SEC, ACC, have long-term broadcast deals with ESPN, leaving the Pac-12 on the back burner for the worldwide leader. And Art Marchand says here, he says ESPN passed on the Big Ten. They passed on Sunday Ticket, the Premier League, the Champions League, and the MLS. So the idea that it will be completely out of the Pac-12 is not in the least bit surprising. Things could always change, and maybe the Pac-12 can figure out a creative way to get ESPN involved, but right now that seems very unlikely. The article continues on here and says that CBS Sports reported earlier this month it has been assumed that an approximate $300 million rights deal might be needed to keep Pac-12 schools from jumping to the Big 12. Schools could follow USC and UCLA in departing the conference if the Pac-12 doesn't secure the annual rights fee level. Amazon has been playing hardball with the Pac-12 in media rights negotiations. Sources told Front Office Sports in February. Other potential media suitors for the Pac-12 include Apple, Fox, and NBC. Remember, Fox and NBC are also in the college football world with the Big Ten, because the Big Ten they diversified their set, whereas a couple of these other places out here, again, we've heard that the CW is involved. We heard there's a streaming aspect of the Pac-12. We see the fact that, the overpayments from this conference before. We hear the fact Washington State's having troubles. The ESPN, isn't in the Pac-12 negotiations. Everything's going to hell in a handbasket for the Pac-12 and even Washington State too. I made a video just yesterday about, how there's going to be some issues eventually with conference realignment. It used to be conference expansion. Teams wanted to add more teams. They wanted to get conference championship games, this and that. So they went to conference expansion. Now it's conference realignment, where, again, the SEC is still expanding with the addition of Texas and Oklahoma. The Big Ten is still expanding with the additions of USC and UCLA. But we're going to potentially get to a point to where there's a diminishing number of returns in terms of additions to these conferences. So as much as we think it's going to be 20 teams, 30 teams, 50 teams in these big conferences, maybe just a power two breakaway, something like that. I think eventually what's going to happen here, and myself and Joel Klatt both agree on this. He actually came out with it first. I made my video after him. Again, he's very, very solid. We agree on the fact that eventually here, Fox, CBS, NBC, ESPN are going to be like, why are we paying Vanderbilt and Alabama the same amount of money? Why are we paying Rutgers and Ohio State the same amount of money? Again, there's multiple situations that could address that situation. I think one thing that I'm going to explore in a future video is a graduated scale or a performance scale in terms of conference payout from these, because the numbers are going to get so big for the Power 2 compared to the other conferences out there. I do think those other three conferences, the ACC, Pac-12, and the Big 12, as they currently stand, are actually very, very competitive. But we're not talking about competition. We're talking about compensation right here. And I think that eventually what's going to happen here is those media partners out here are going to be like, let's be efficient with our dollars. I don't want 20 teams. I want 12 of the best. I want 12 in this region. I want 14 in this region, whatever the situation is. You want the best product on TV. You can't do that with 30 teams in a conference. So with all of that said right there, issues with Washington State, issues with the Pac-12, the fact that conference expansion might not necessarily be coming in, again, something that's very important is, are you good TV out there? I think there's a lot of things that are limiting. One of the big factors in conference realignment, especially for the mid and the smaller tiers, and also for the Big Ten in their own essence, is your media market. Washington State's got a lot of things that it's battling up against. One, it's battling up against its region, and two, it's battling up against, how hard it is to build in that region. Let me show you, again, for those of you who don't know what Pullman, Washington looks like, let me show you what it looks like. This right here is Pullman, Washington. As you can see, they have this little red indent out here. It's got the 30,000 people. Oh, don't forget their don't forget their suburb of Armstrong, population 900. In essence, what's going on here is you see the fact that Washington State is here. University of Idaho is here. University of Idaho was the first ever FBS member to go down a division. They went up to FBS from FCS, and then they eventually went back down. It's a very, very difficult region to recruit to. The good thing about the Pac-12 is that they've been able to, kind of, I don't want to say subsidize the region for Washington State. Washington State's a very solid member, but you see the fact that the closest big market they're going to have is Spokane, Washington, a good 60, 70 miles away from it. So Washington State is in the middle of nowhere. And if you've ever seen pictures of Washington State, it looks like Kansas with a couple more rolling hills. So we've seen a couple of those big schools out there realign. Again, so we saw the fact that Texas and Oklahoma, those are very, very historic programs in reasonably marketed, areas. Norman, Oklahoma for Oklahoma is in the Oklahoma City region. Austin kind of is in its own little triangle between Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio. It's kind of in the middle of that. So it's got a good amount of people out there. But Pullman, Washington, it's got a couple of buildings, and then it's basically Kansas with a couple of hills. Again, the Palouse is one of the most fertile soil regions in the world. Again, I used to live close to this region out here, but that's basically what it is. So other than that Pac-12 money, they really don't have a lot to fall back on because it's basically just a couple of rolling hills and tradition. So in the future of conference realignment, again, marquee matchups is important. Washington State actually has been able to field some very good teams when they had the late and great Mike Leach on their team. They actually eventually got to the point where they were a top 15, top 20 team. Pretty good years out there. However, it's kind of inconsistent with that. So that's the situation there. You see the fact that the region, it's really hard to attract a lot of people out there. Again, I think Washington State bats above their level in terms of people watching them. But again, it's a super, super isolated region. Not a lot of resources out there. And it sounds like those resources are getting lesser and lesser by the day. So I said before, I would go over those things and then go over what I think is going to happen. Not much. And again, the first thing we need to address here is this whole situation. I do think Brett McMurphy, again, Action Sports Network, he's been doing a really good job. I would suspect that Brett McMurphy has, again, it's true information out there, what he's been able to post about Washington State and the fact that they're pulling back some of their spending. However, to indicate that that could potentially be involved in conference realignment if they don't get the media deal that they want. First of all, people have to leave the Pac-12, and that sounds like nobody's leaving the Pac-12. Colorado, the most likely member of the Pac-12, has basically stated that, yeah, we're staying in the Pac-12. Colorado AD Phil DiStefano has come out and said, he says that Colorado is committed. He says, nobody's asked us. I shouldn't even say that. We're committed to the Pac-12. DiStefano said of any overtures to change conferences via the USA Today, what I've said along with the other presidents and chancellors is we're not even going to think about going anywhere, none of us, until we see what kind of offer we get, and that's still being worked out, and I'm confident it's going to be fine. So remember here, I think that there's a lot of situations with conference realignment. There's stories here, there's stories there. I think that, paying attention to too much leaks in here and there or trying to read too much into things will get you in trouble. I also want to make sure I reference this. So the fact that the Pac-12's probably not imminently falling apart, again, if the Big Ten comes calling, I think all bets are off. However, I don't think they're going to come calling because, like I said before, the fact that the Big Ten is going to 16 is already putting pressure on the fact of people being like, are you sure we're adding too many teams? This is too much travel. This is too many places to go. Again, you could maybe argue for adding an addition out west for USC and UCLA to shorten some of their trips up. But for the most part, I think that 16, again, based on the limitations of how many games you can play and this and that, I think that it's going to get hard to get beyond 16 and be a financially responsible decision. There's that. And then there's also the situation of, nonprofits, universities, and how they actually claim losses here and there because there's a lot more that goes into it than what's being reported. So my boy Tony Altamar, I love him. If you don't like him, whatever. Okay, I love what he does. He's absolutely positive. He's one of the only people in the world that really approaches conference realignment and college football from the administrative perspective. Everybody else talks from a TV, person's perspective. There's so many of them out there. I'm trying to get my boy Bob Thompson on the pod here, but anyways, continuing on here, he says a quick look at Washington State's athletic budget cut situation. A lot of talk this week about WSU Cougars' budget situation. It's too bad, but you're hearing about it hardest at Wazzu because while Washington State is an awesome school, they don't have the same degree of resources to absorb budget impacts that others in the Pac-12 do. We already saw the fact that the region, it's a much smaller, university as compared to the other universities. It's got a lot of things that are kind of holding it back. It says here that Washington State has always been an interesting hybrid. Their finances and their mission are very similar to many Big 12 and Mountain West universities. All the, even coming from my boy Tony Altamar, all the conspiracy theorists out there are going to start saying, ooh, yeah, you see, they're going to go to the Mountain West. Anyways, continuing on, it says, though their strategy and culture are deeply perfect fits for the Pac-12 counterparts. And we go through a couple of these pictures here. So we talk about endowment. They're somewhere around the middle, maybe the lower half of the middle. Annual giving donations, they are some of the lowest in the Pac-12. We see athletic budget department, they are some of the lowest. Core university budget, they are still above Oregon. Again, it's a big issue with Oregon joining the Big Ten is that situation right there. Olympic sports, they're one of the lower ones. And department profits from football and men's basketball, they are some of the lowest ones as there. You see the fact that Stanford did not disclose it because Stanford's got $30 billion of endowment. I think they're just fine on cash. And this next tweet here is the most important thing to put context around this whole situation because although they are going to be having some budget cuts here, overspending is kind of the name of the game for colleges and universities, especially when it comes to athletic departments, because those are some of the only entities that actually can make money and even, generate some, revenue. So continuing on here, it says, at the same time, the situation irks me greatly because every Pac-12 school, including Washington State, absolutely has the resources to absorb the Comcast overpayment money without impact. Again, they're still not happy about it because Larry Scott is definitely not very popular in the Pac-12 realm. It says, I won't opine endlessly about the dumber, impractical aspects of cost accounting. Yes, I know why they do it, but it's still an eye roll. Yet every Pac-12 school is wildly overbilling itself in internal charges for the scholarships that they provide to their athletes who are about to be declared employees anyway. It says here that Washington State's AD, Pat Chun, should not have to absorb these impacts out of his budget. Washington State, like everybody else, is already overcharging itself by more than enough. The always wise John Wilner pointed out that Pac-12 presidents should absorb the Comcast money out of their reserve funds. Continuing, so again, that situation there, the Comcast overpayments from Larry Scott, the gift he keeps on giving, is probably not going to be a big situation there. He says, I will take it a step further. Washington State already overbills its athletic department. No need to make cuts. Just stop overbilling quite as much for the year. And he says, here's the secret why. And again, for anybody here who ever works with nonprofit associations, sometimes they don't promote the best practices because that's the nature of what a nonprofit is. I know that Washington State is a state university. Some of them aren't. Stanford, as an example, is a for-profit entity. Again, Stanford, it's kind of its own situation in a lot of respects here. We continue with what he's saying here. It's not just cost accounting. As a baby freshman student staffer at USC Athletics, I learned the real reason why schools overbuild their athletic departments. Big reason why? It's way easier to fundraise and get donors to sponsor athletic scholarships, which are overpaid to the school, than it is to get people to donate to fund random student scholarships. It says, I totally get that, but Washington State, like all Pac-12 schools, has the resources to absorb the cost either on a broader school level, or else Pat and the Washington State folks should stand up for the amount they're already overpaying. Not to be the dorky MBA here, but reality finance sometimes needs to win the battle over eye-rolling accounting. As the great USC professor used to say, the goal of accounting is to be precisely wrong, whereas the goal of finance is to be vaguely right. Let's get this one right, Pac-12 schools. Don't cut budgets. And he says right here, the annual internal charge by the schools, and then the share of the Comcast total overpayment. We see the fact that they could all easily absorb that charge and continue on. Now, whether or not they're going to continue on with a media deal that doesn't reach $350 million or $300 million or this or that, I don't know. But I do know right now they're going to handle the situation. What I think happened here, Brett McMurphy, getting a little frisky there with some of his reports, kind of pointing towards a direction and feeding off of everybody's, fever. But my boy Tony Altibar puts it all into perspective there. I do think in the long haul, Washington State is going to have issues in the same way that I think Oregon State's going to have some issues, in the same way that I think that Wake Forest is going to have some issues, in the same way that I think that Purdue is going to have some issues, in the same way I think that Vanderbilt's going to have some issues. The more and more these conferences get to the point that they need to be efficient with their dollars, especially from the TV contracts perspective here, the less likely they're going to be involved here. Now, more than likely what's going to happen here, I think that Washington State and the Pac-12 are going to extend their deal, but man, conference realignment is speeding up, and eventually, once the ACC's deal gets kind of done and the teams kind of move around, we're going to see some more, how do I say this, consolidation by conferences, because Washington State, with all the limitations that they have, it's really hard to see them get paid the same as Washington going forward. All right, guys, that's it. Thank you so much for being here. Remember, please subscribe. We're this close to 1,000. Get in the comments. Let me know what you think about this whole situation. I personally think, again, it's a technical situation with nonprofits and this and that, blah blah blah. How they actually do the accounting and the finance, I don't really care. But I do know more than likely Washington State is going to be fine. But again, all those Big 12 fans who want those four corner schools, hey man, they're going to keep on chirping, man, and there's nothing really going to be able to stop them. All right, guys, that's it. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you guys later. I am out.